Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video we're going to get stuck into painting the tank. Which tank? Well, if you watched last week's video, you'll know that there's a new series I want to start producing over here on YouTube, which will be multi-part, multi-episode videos to do with painting different types of vehicles. And I thought it'd be fun to start it off with a super heavy tank, in this case the new plastic Fellblade that came out a few weeks ago for Horus Heresy. So last week we focused in on the prep side of things, building the tank, little tips and tricks and stuff to do with that. And this one's going to be much more about getting stuck in with the painting. Now, I've taught vehicle painting classes for nearly a decade now, but generally over here on YouTube, I do a sort of one-shot video where I do a miniature start to finish in one go, kind of broader overview of it, just enjoyable tabletop type stuff. So it's going to be a challenge for me, figuring out how to structure these series to come here on YouTube. So I'm going to need your guys' feedback, but I think I've broken it down in a fairly manageable way. It's not going to be as in-depth as it would be on a class because there's not going to be that one-to-one feedback element, but I still want to go into more detail and I want to show you as much of the painting as possible. And what I should say is this is not going to be about speed paint, tricks, hacks, all that side of things. I am a slow painter. I just enjoy painting. I try to be efficient where I can be, but to me the enjoyment is as much about the process itself rather than rushing towards to try and get to the finished piece. So that's how I'm going to be presenting it. So for this video I am going to be focusing a lot on using the airbrush, but everything we do in it is applicable whether or not you choose to use an airbrush to apply your paint. So if you would rather use a rattle can or a hairy brush or a sponge or whatever, everything I'm going to talk about, all the colour placements, all the shading, all that idea applies regardless. It's just I am going to be using an airbrush for it. There's just a couple of little extra bits of prep we need to do before we can really get stuck in. Now, one of the challenges you're going to come across when painting a vehicle or a large model is how do you hold the thing? And this super heavy, this Fellblade's the largest miniature I've painted in ages, probably since the night or something like that. Now, I'm going to choose to use the egg mini holders by AO Artisopus. We've got a signature series of black ones, colour paint ones, which you can use. So here I'm just using a magnet underneath, and then I'll stick it on this, and that's strong enough to hold the tank because it's plastic now, hooray. So it's just nice and comfortable and easy for me to use. One thing I have seen in the past that I've often thought about picking up are these miniature holders by Tamiya. So the one on the right there, it's got like a reverse spring, so you stick that up under the vehicle and then you can hold it. But it's definitely something worth thinking about because we don't want to be touching the model loads. We might be wiping the paint off and all the rest of it. And also comfort is, it's important. And then lastly, because I'm going to be doing a lot of airbrushing, I'm going to be, aerosolizing paint, and it's going to be mixing, spraying through the air and then hitting the model. And if there's a lot of dust and particulate stuff between the brush and the tank, or stuff that's already on the tank, then that's going to get soaked up in the paint and it'll end up on the finished model. And if you've got pets, if you like wearing woolly jumpers like I do, anything like that, you might well have a bit of an issue with that fluff and stuff getting on your model. So I always like to just give it a little going over with a brush, and often just a blast of air from the airbrush just to remove. Try my best, but as you will see, I don't get all of it. Now let's paint. Colour-wise, I mentioned last week, I want to go for that more sort of white Death Guard look, like the artwork we see here on Flight of the Eisenstein. There's so much inspiration out there, isn't there, for colour schemes, whether that's other models other people have done or artwork like this or just streaming something up. But that's my goal with this. I wanted to do that more white rather than that sort of beigey colour that we see a lot of them in. So the model has been primed using that Mr. Surface primer that we showed last week. And something Andy brought up when he did his Power Sword video recently, and I think is shown quite clearly here as well, is when you use a surface primer that has a bit more of a glossy finish to it, so like this or like GW's Wraithbone or Chaos Black even, you might find that your paint sort of beads. The first layer of paint that you put on it beads up. So you can see that happening here. So I'm spraying Mini Colour Peat here. Obviously, if you're watching this when the video first goes out, you won't be able to pick this up just yet, although late pledges are open on the Kickstarter. I'll link to that. But it's a burnt umber colour, essentially, is what we're choosing to base coat it with. But the this beading that you're seeing happening on here is just because of that slightly glossy primer. It's nothing to do with you mixing the paint in correctly. It's nothing to do with the pressure being wrong and stuff. Something you'll come across often when you're airbrushing is sort of speckling. And that tends to occur when the pressure is too low for the thickness of the paint that you're spraying. This isn't that case. This is just an adherence thing. So the first coat you go, oh no, that doesn't look too good. And what am I doing wrong? You're doing nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. As soon as you put the second coat on, it'll start smoothing right out, as you'll be able to see on here. Now, I'm going to use mini colours for this tank because we've got mini colours and I love them and we made them for a reason to use them. But I'll make sure I give you guys other options for what you can use if you want to do this scheme straight away. But I have thinned this, so it is a thin mix. I want to be spraying this on, you know, where it's taking me sort of 3 or 4 layers to build up a nice smooth coat on the model. If I had this colour in a rattle can, I would rattle can the whole tank in it, but I don't. So I'm having to airbrush it. But it's no bad thing in the sense of it's letting me spend a little bit of time with the miniature before I start doing more intricate paintwork. I can start identifying areas on the model that I might need to take more time on. I can even sort of have a practice at this stage of how I want to hold and approach doing some of my highlights and stuff later. And it doesn't matter because we're just looking at spraying it the one colour, just getting that nice smooth finish, you know, complete finish over the model before we carry on. So I've given it 2 sort of all over coats, and now I'm going in with this third one where I'm going in and focusing on all the sort of recesses. And you'll often find this on a lot of marine tanks particularly. Sometimes you'll spray it all and then the recesses won't get much paint in them. This is how I mitigate that. So I do an overall once or twice, then I go in and focus specifically on those recesses. And then afterwards I will go in and do an overall again over the lot. So we have a sort of similar level of finish across the entire miniature. This is going to be, like I say, it's going to be an experience, this video, because I'm leaving a lot more footage in than I normally do. And I hope that is useful for you guys. But I also need to think, I don't want to forget to say things. I don't want to repeat myself too often in it. But yeah, if I could get a burnt umber rattle can, I'd just be going with that. And why burnt umber? Well, that's the colour I want really in the shadows of my white. You know, when you paint white, there tends to be an awful lot of colour in it because of reflected light. So the things that are around it will colour it. You know, if you look at a white wall or you look at anything like that. And really, that's, in my opinion, one of the most fun things about painting black and white is those other colours that you can choose to get in them. And I felt like I want it to be a grey white, but I want there to be a little bit of brown to that. And this just seemed like the perfect colour. So there you can see it's just a lovely finish on that model there. It's absolutely beautiful. That primer's really helped us out, and as has sort of applying the paint like I've done it. But as I mentioned, the fluff. There's one. I missed it. And it's now covered in paint, so I could rub it off and I could spray over it. That would be fine. Or I'll just choose later on in the process to turn that area into a little bit of weathering and battle damage, which is what I'm going to decide. This is a Death Guard tank, so there'll probably be quite a bit of that on it, so I'm not going to stress about it. This is not a showcase display level miniature I'm going to be painting here. This is a gaming miniature, albeit often a focal point of the army. It's still going to be a gaming miniature. And yeah, I wish I'd worn gloves. I meant to say that earlier and I forgot, and that's why. So next up, we're going to apply olive. So this is, well, you can see it's kind of a sort of greeny, browny, deck tanny colour. Steel Legion drab, maybe, but no, it wouldn't. That'd be too brown. Yeah, anything in those sort of khaki drab, probably type cut listed colours will give you something not dissimilar to this. But this is one of my favourite colours in the range, actually, the browns and greens. I really do love them. And thanks to everyone on Patreon and Discord who chose what colour the tank would be. White or off-white and green were the two, I think were separated by like 1% or 2%, but they were the most popular colours. So that's what we're going for with this. I'm starting off with this first highlight, this nice broad highlight. I want to leave plenty of the dark in the shadows, but a nice broad highlight with the first pass here. And all I'm doing is I'm not really concentrating on any of the detail whatsoever that's on this tank. I'm just looking at it as shapes. So what are the barrels? Well, it's 2 cylinders. And if you need to go and have a look at some renders of cylinders or some photographs of cylinders, you know, metal pipes, things like that, just get yourself an idea of where the highlight is on them and where the shadows are on them, and also the amount of area that those take up, the highlight, the midtone, and the shadow. It often is not how you imagine. That's why I think references are really, really, really useful. So now we've moved on from the cylinders. I'm now looking at the top of the turret. So essentially we have a hemisphere, and then we have a few flat areas. So again, it's thinking about, okay, so when we paint that in, how does light tend to behave on them? Now, I am going to choose to paint this tank in that relatively, I think, dramatic, quite high contrast, sort of light and dark shading across the model. Very sort of reminiscent of when we were all getting into it in sort of 2015, 2016, how we were all painting them, really. And it's good fun. But, you know, tastes change, don't they? But all I would say is go more dramatic than you want the final effect to be. Because if you go too subtle at this stage, it will end up looking almost like a flat colour at the end, where you may as well have just rattle canned it the one colour, which is a great way of painting too. And in this whole series, I want to explore different ways of painting the vehicles. So we'll look at doing one where we do a completely different style of shading. We'll look at doing one where we do just use a rattle can rather than an airbrush, so we have no shading effectively, or light and dark shading, or modulation is what we're going to call it. So this style of modulation that we're seeing here, where we put sort of light and dark across each panel, rather than dark around the edges and then light in the center, we're actually choosing to have light, say, transition across the panel. This was popularized by people like Adam Wilder and then Phil Stachinskas from Forge World. And I would say that those two people have probably had the biggest impact on how I enjoy painting. And Michael Rinaldi is another one. His tank art books. You know, these guys were just absolute like pioneers, geniuses, and brilliant teachers as well. So I would say go out and, you have people like Phil Stachinskas and Mark Bedford setting that tone with the Imperial Armour books and then into the Heresy books. So you had Adam Wilder producing these tutorials in loads of military modelling magazines. And then you had Michael Rinaldi writing these brilliant tank art books. So if you want to get into vehicles, particularly things like sort of the airbrushing side of it, as well as other fun elements, absolutely, then do consider going and checking the work that those guys have done. Say they were my inspiration. They were how I have learned from those books. Don't regret any of it. And then it's a case of adapting it to your personal taste, and whether that's changes project to project, or whether that changes as your painting develops. I would just say there is no right or wrong, and I don't want to be preachy about that. Like, you know, trends come and go and all the rest of it. So just these tanks are for you, right? So paint it how you like it to look, you can see I think it's incredibly rewarding and fun to do a nice big project like this, because it takes ages, right? So you've got to work at it. Now here I am just popping the two pieces next to each other just to check that they're kind of marrying up, as in the amount of area I'm giving to this mid-tone or first highlight, whatever you want to call it. And then just checking that they say that I wouldn't want a very dark area next to a very light area if they were on exactly the same sort of plane. I think that looks a little bit odd. And really, I just want the tank to make sense when we look at it. It doesn't need to look realistic at all. Just needs to make sense as I'm looking at the miniature. And now I'm going to move on to the body of the tank itself. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to those of you who support us over on Patreon. So on Patreon, you tend to get most weeks masterclass level videos from Andy, usually. At the moment, he's done a 6 or 7 parter on his recent Golden Demon winning mini. And then there'll be other little sort of army painting projects from each of us as well. And I think I'm going to start doing a few more Patreon videos for projects that perhaps don't have quite such a broad appeal over here on YouTube, but that I do really still want to do. I'm gonna look at doing those over on Patreon instead. But if it wasn't for your guys' support, we simply couldn't do this. And particularly these types of videos that I want to be doing on YouTube now, where we're focusing in on more in-depth stuff, they won't have such a broad appeal, which means that we won't get the numbers that we require essentially to make things sustainable. So that support from the patrons is absolutely invaluable. So thank you ever so much for that. And if for any reason you can't support us over on Patreon, then your likes, your subscribes here, your comments, and particularly things like comments and shares on the videos, they make a huge difference because it just bumps that visibility up and YouTube goes, oh, this video is doing well, we'll promote it a bit more. Or, you know, we'll charge people a bit more to advertise during this video, you know, things like that. So all of that, it's not just lip service, you know, it does make a big difference to small channels like ours. So thank you. And here, say on the tank itself, it's just flat panels. So I'm doing a nice transition, starting light, going into dark on them. And then if I see areas like the engine cowling there, well, those are just cylinders. So again, we just highlight up the center of them. So let's have a quick look at how it's all going. And I think it's really important when you get models, particularly of this size, that you do take a moment to just put them together and see how it's working, and also put them under normal lighting, not your desk lamp. You'll notice there's a lot of glare. I found it really challenging painting this. It's the biggest thing. I'm going to have to change my setup if I want to do more of these videos. It's very, very awkward. But here you see I'm just sort of going, right, everything that's facing upwards, is it a similar level of brightness? You know, is it making sense? Have I missed any areas? You know, do I need to go in and brighten anything up? Or indeed go back in with the burnt umber colour, the peat, and darken any areas back down. But you'll have noticed I've not done any masking. I've not done anything like that. It's just a case of moving the model around and manipulating which part of the cone of paint that's coming out of my airbrush is hitting the actual miniature. But so far, I think it's looking pretty good. And when you're doing a mini like this, where you aren't doing a typical pre-shade, so that might be a grayscale pre-shade, so white over black, or it might be a colourful pre-shade, you know, like white over pink, or something that's popular for yellow. Is quite a fun, sort of punchy, gimmicky way of doing it, and we will explore that type of thing as well in future videos. It's all good fun. But if you're doing a colour like this, or say black, where you aren't working over pre-shade, I find you do need to do a few more mixes and just build it up a little more slowly. You know, my dream army painting ones are where I do a black and white pre-shade and then one, maybe two colours over the top of it, and I'm done. And that black and white pre-shade creates a bunch of different tones. It's all fabulous. But we don't have that here, so we need to build those tones up as we continue to paint. So here I'm actually just starting with a 50-50 mix. So I've mixed the white into the olive. All the time I'm thinning my paint, so I spray about 20 psi. I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and I'm using one of our new Harder and Steenbeck Evolutions here. And I thin the paint accordingly so that it's the thickness that where it sprays through the brush without any speckling and any clogging. It's not spidering off on the surface when my paint hits it, but also it's probably taking me a couple of coats to get the desired opacity that I want. And that means that depending on the paint I'm using, depends on how much I will need to thin it. But typically I would say with this, I've been using 2 to 3 parts thinner to 1 part paint. And I say I've been using mini colour paints for all of this because that's just fun. It's awesome. And the other side of doing it like this, where we build it up nice and slowly, is it means that each individual spray I do here generally doesn't matter. So if it's not quite right, it's okay. I can go in and correct it. So whilst it may seem a little intimidating, I find it a very relaxing way to paint. And I actually would encourage anyone watching this, so you can see there, we're just looking at the front and going, oh, hang on, there's a cylinder there. It's not a flat panel. It's a bit different. So we would highlight that slightly differently. So the apex, as it were, of the cylinder, is where we put that light rather than the front, like we're doing on these flat panels just here. And you see I'm spraying off the front of the tank and pulling the brush back towards the panels. Now we're starting to get something. I mean, you could probably leave it at that. If you liked that kind of beige look for your Death Guard, this is probably a pretty decent spot to leave that. I've only just realised that watching it back like this. I'd probably go in with like a deck tan colour. But here you see, that was our first highlight, and there's our second highlight gone on. And it's just reinforcing all those shapes that are on there. And thinking, where are people's eyes being drawn? Is any of it look a bit incongruous? Now I'm moving on to pure white. So this is Dove by Minicolor. Just following the areas. And again, it's really up to you how much of the area you're covering with this final highlight color. the more of it you cover, then the less of that mid-tone you're going to have. And if you like that, great. And if you don't, do less of it. But I think for me, one of the real light bulb moments was recognizing that it's just a series of shapes that I'm highlighting at this stage. I don't need to be worrying about detail. Detail is what we're going to pick out later on with things like pin washes, painting in detail, edge highlights, all that sort of stuff. At this point, it's just shapes. And the light, you know, the light moves from one panel to the next. It doesn't suddenly stop and start again, right? And I'm not holding my brush at one distance, the same distance the whole time. I'm moving it in and out depending on what I'm working on. And when I do that, I need to be mindful of the pressure. As I get closer to the model, then the pressure the paint's hitting the model is going to increase. So if my paint is quite thin, like this is quite dilute, if I get too close and that pressure gets too high, then I might get that spidering off effect. One of the things you'll get with a better quality airbrush, like all of the Harder Cement ones, is you'll have control with the trigger. By how much you press it down will affect the pressure. So again, all of that will come to you. But I learned to airbrush on a Warhound Titan. That was where I cut my teeth. And by the end of that project, I felt really confident doing it. So I think a big old tank like this is a brilliant first project for some airbrushing, because nothing we're doing here is particularly intricate. But it's naturally it takes a bit of time. You know, this was the best part of a day of just spraying this and getting it right. Obviously filming and stuff affects that, but there's no substitute, I think, for spending time with the brush and doing it. And again, it's something I'm so looking forward to doing these series now over here, because again, this is what I love doing. You know, this and weird grimdark stuff really are my favorite things. So I'd love to start featuring them more. And one of the nice things about marine tanks is we do have all these wonderful changes of angle. And where you have that significant change of angle, it's a great opportunity to get that sort of funky contrast in. So you see there where those little sort of, I don't know, connection points at the top slope down 45 degrees. We leave it darker at the top, and then we go light on the edge where it's done it. And you'll have seen on the sides of the tank, I've chosen to light the bottom and leave the top sides darker. If you look at, I can show you sort of photographs of stuff where the lighting is that way on something, and I can show you photographs of stuff where it would be light at the top and dark at the bottom. It's completely up to you how you want it. Darker at the top will look more dramatic, because what you will have is the light, the dark on the side, and then on the top of the tank it's nice and light. So you have your brightest area next to one of your darkest areas on the tank, and that does create that sort of contrast, and it does have quite a dramatic impact. For some people it's too much. I say for me, I thought it'd be fun to push it a little, and I'm sure this is still far too subtle for many people, but I was already worrying that it was too high contrast. But I'm very pleased it's not. You know, it's coming out really, really nicely. It's also tough at this stage, I think, when you look at the model. See, I've missed a bit there. I need to go back in and fix that. Again, it's why it's always worth looking at it as a whole. But yeah, I think it's tough at this stage when you're doing the airbrushing and everything is sort of one colour, because it can look a bit overpowering. It can be sort of, you know, can't see the wood for the trees type thing. But it's sort of just having a bit of confidence in yourself. Again, you use reference pictures, take your time, and it will come together. But yeah, that 45 degree angle where the hull is attaching to the sides, attaching to the top, I need to go in and pick that one up. And also I think I need to just brighten up the top of the hull here as well. I didn't think it was quite bright enough compared to, say, the turret. But hopefully you can see here as well the fact that what a good job that primer has done. So that bit of prep work we did, and as I say, it's not showcase at all. If this was a display piece, I would be taking much more time to get rid of any imperfections. It's not. It's for gaming. Like, let's not let a tiny little divot in there derail the paint job, right? Just get on and paint it. I'm not saying be sloppy. I'm not saying be lazy. But I think for me anyway, I have to make a choice, like how far down that rabbit hole I'm willing to go to make it absolutely perfect to paint. And fundamentally, if I'm not going to give it the amount of time to paint that I would for a display model, then I'm probably not going to give it the amount of prep time that I would. But that doesn't mean it gets no prep time. But hopefully you can see here the work that prep has done. the surface primer as well over the top, and then these lovely smooth coats that we're getting with the airbrush. It's just a beautiful sort of smooth finish on this tank. This is a little donor tank I do practice various schemes on, and you can see there I didn't do enough of a dramatic contrast on the side of it, and it ended up looking just a bit flat. Now, something I've just noticed, or I had just noticed when I was doing this, is I've completely missed some mold lines on these braces, are they called? Bits that connect the two barrels together, and they're too bad. Like, I know on the barrels there's still a few of the seams that I didn't do perfectly, but they're good enough. I can live with them absolutely, but these I could not. So we're early enough into the paint job. We're working with plastic here as well, which makes it even easier. I know the paint is going to stick to the plastic well. If you used to have issues like this with resins and we had to scrape them off, then you probably need to go back and do some priming, which is frustrating, but this is just plastic. So go in there, scrape them off, and just go in and repaint. So I've loaded back up with peat with the darker colour, and I'll just repeat the process. Look at that, even when I went in to try and remove them, I didn't get it all. But I hope what this does show, I'm sorry if you can hear me drinking tea as well. So this is a long time to be sat talking about one thing. I've got my notes. I don't think I'm missing anything, but please let me know in the comments if you think, oh, can you explain this element in more detail? Please let me know that, and I will endeavour to in the future videos. But yeah, I think it's a good example of how projects like this, I think any painting project, but particularly these big projects, they aren't just linear. You don't just move on to the next step, move on to the next step. You can always go back and alter things. I've had tanks like that Stormblade I showed in the last video that I did as got my Golden Demon with, like, I painted that, and then the Iron Warriors decals came out. So I went back and completely did decals on a finished mini. But anyway, that's the painting. Now we need to move on to a little bit of masking. So in this video, I'm just going to cover masking with tape. We'll look at all the different ways we can do it in the future in different projects, but I really want this playlist to become a valuable resource tool, and therefore I don't want to focus on 1,000,001 things on every project. Let's just focus on a couple and understanding them well, so that we can then go off and deep dive on them in other ways as well. So this one, we're just going to do tape. So I've given the model just a light coat of gloss varnish, just to make sure that when we do tape over it, the tape comes off easier, less likely to remove paint, all that sort of thing. But it's just a little coat. We're not making it super shiny. Now for tape, I tend to use a lot of Tamiya tape, as you can see here, but there are other manufacturers. And as soon as I go any wider than about sort of 20, 30 mil, I'll just use normal decorators tape, masking tape for it. But for the finer stuff, I use this, and support hobby stores, all the rest of it. I use this stuff, so I get it when I'm there. But I love using tape for masking stuff. The style for a lot of the Heresy vehicles we were shown in the books and the Imperial Armour stuff was for stripes, and they do look cool. And the way I like to do stripes is I like to find a piece of tape that is the width of the stripe that I want, and I will apply that first, and then I will tape off to the sides of it. But one of the things you might run into, like I am here, is trying to tape over a really bumpy area where there's like rivets and all the rest of it, and it just makes it a little bit awkward to get that nice sharp edge. And also I couldn't then fit tape either side of it particularly easily. So in this case, I realised that because I had the hinges and they have those straight edges down them, I could actually use those as a guideline. So this is one of the few cases where I haven't used a piece of tape to decide the width of the stripe. I'm actually just choosing the piece of tape here, and the gap between them will determine that length of that stripe. And even though these tapes, they say they're low tack, I always like to detack them a little bit. Now you might hear some people say, oh, detack them on your trousers, like, as in stick them on your trousers a couple of times and pull them off. But what I found happens with that is I end up getting fibres on them, and then I'll stick them on the thing, and then those fibres, and then the paint goes over them, and we get more and more fluff on the model. So I just tend to say just to pop it around my finger once or twice that you saw me do them. And then the other thing I would say with masking is mask way more than you think you need to. The amount of times I've tried to be lazy and just think, oh, I'll be accurate with this, I'll do my airbrush, and then you'll spray it in, it'll be fine, and then you'll suddenly realise that on the back of the tank, facing completely opposite direction, somehow you've managed to get a load of paint. So yeah, and again, this is I think a relaxing element of the thing. To take your time with it. This is an entire hobby session, just masking it up for me. There is no rush. This footage you're seeing here, I think I've sped up 8 times speed. So to give you an idea of how slow I was working doing this, I'm sure there's lots of people can do it quicker. I can't, so therefore I don't rush it. I don't want to sound anti-speed paint because I completely understand the value in it, but I feel quite anti-speed paint, if that makes sense. I feel like personally attacked when people talk about speed painting. But yeah, efficiency is different. But I think we've got enough tutorials on how to quickly do something. So these I find is a really useful little tool as well. It's just a little my dad's old penknife. The old scissors on a Victorinox penknife. I find it excellent. I use these for decals as well quite often. Just really useful to have on hand. And you'll also see me using my tweezers here to push the tape into the various recesses. I'll often use a rubber tipped sculpting tool to do that with as well. We could use a biro even, but I suppose a bit of risk with the ink on that. But yeah, it's just really important that your tape is, really pushed into where you want it. And then another material that I will use very, very, very often for masking large areas is cling film. Now, I said we're just focusing on tape, but this is kind of the same. To tape up the barrels would be a huge amount of tape, no need for it. So we can just use a bit of cling film. And I'm masking off here all the areas that I want to paint green. And when it comes to sort of choosing where do I put the secondary colour on the tank, I think it can be quite challenging. But you have tons of colour plates in the various Forge World books. And then also you've got the internet. Like, there's a lot of Fellblades out there. Go and have a look at the pictures. It's what I did. Go and have a look at the pictures. I said, would this work if I did it this colour? Someone's bound to have done it. Go and have a look. Do I like it? Don't I like it? And then you can make your choices. And again, if you don't like them, just add them or take them away. Now let's move on to the green itself. So here I am going to do a more traditional grey scale reshade, which means I'm going to start with black and then I'm going to build up to white. And I probably could have just painted the whole tank like I was going to, like I have done with the white, and used that as the pre-shade. But as I said, that's a little bit more subtle. Whereas I tend to find when I'm doing a grayscale pre-shade, I'd be a little less subtle, a little bit more dramatic. So that's what I decided to do with this. We will do vehicles in the future where we do a traditional grayscale pre-shade as well. So I want to make sure we can cover everything, but just not all in one video. If you jump in on the Discord, you'll see people, the Super Heavy Challenge channel, people are going all in. There's people doing it for the first time. There's people who've done it loads of times before. There's people just showing off their stuff, and then there's people, just wanting to join in. So I'm really grateful to the reaction you guys have had to that. So thank you. It's exactly what I wanted from Discord. I want it to be a positive, supportive sort of hobby space for us to use. And if we can integrate it with videos that we're doing, then more's the better. So for the green here, I've chosen to use a mini colour Mallard. So the greens and browns are probably my favourite paints in the set. If I was using a paint currently available, probably something like Orc Flesh as a contrast paint, I think would work quite well here. I think it would be a nice colour to use. One of the benefits, of course, of being able to find a non-contrast paint that's the colour I want means it's going to be easier for me to use that with a brush as well, should I want to. And then I'm going to shade it with a darker green. So here I'm spraying the green into the areas of shadow, so over the area of black. Now you might think, why have you done the mid-tone first? Well, I want the mid-tone to be the strong colour on there. So I want that to go over the white. If I had sprayed the shadow colour on first, if I had put too much shadow on there, and I had then wanted to bring more mid-tone down over it, it wouldn't have been as punchy as I applied it over the darker colour. So the colour you want to be the most vibrant on there, I would suggest you do first when you do these grayscales. So I've shaded it using Bottle. Again, I'd use something like Dark Angel's green contrast paint if I was doing it now. And then I am highlighting it with a mix of Gherkin and Mallard. Here, I maybe Moot Green mix into Orc Flesh. Give you something not dissimilar. I really want to paint Beal Tan Eldar at the moment. I don't know why. I've got a real nostalgia thing. And I think this would be a great green for them, actually. Now it's time to peel and see how it went. I don't leave the paint to dry. Literally, I've cleaned the airbrush and now I'm undoing it. I haven't found any real benefit of letting it fully cure before taping it or taping it off. And something went wrong. So I'd obviously not pressed the tape down hard enough on that area. And as I've done that, very thin, as you can see, very, very dilute black, it's gone underneath. But this is one of the reasons that I like to take the tape off quite quickly. And also one of the reasons that I did that little gloss coat before we put the tape on, because here I'm able to just use a little bit of water and I can reactivate the paint and wipe it off. Now that's a property of Minicolor. If this was like a Citadel paint or something like that, I would just use a little bit of airbrush thinner, and you, or even airbrush cleaner if you needed to, and you could have exactly the same. You'd be able to wipe it off. You'd be absolutely fine, not needing loads of pressure or anything. And because you've got that little gloss varnish on there, it's very, very unlikely you'll go through to the paint underneath and do any damage there. So again, don't worry if you get a little bit of bleeding like that. It's eminently fixable. But that's why I like to take the tape off quite soon after, rather than let it dry, sort of overnight. If I was better at filming, I would make some fancy looking sort of peel porn short out of these, but I'm not. Decals. Now we've got a dedicated video to decals, but I would like to cover them in here. So with decals, I say I'll link the video up in the top that's dedicated to them. I'm just going to repeat the process if we show in that video, but I wanted to show them again here and in sort of their entirety on a model. Decals are, I love using them. I love layering them up. I think I'll do an updated video on it where we go into a bit more detail on them. But it's the preparation that I use, and you may hear people use different types, but this is what I have used for over 10 years. This is what I teach. It's what I find to be very, very effective and reliable, which is to give a nice solid gloss coat first before we do anything else, because we want our decals to be as flush to the surface as we possibly can get them. We want no air between the decal and the thing itself. We will also be using some solvents to set those decals to dissolve the films. And often if you've used airbrushing where you've got very, very thin, delicate layers of paint, you might find that some of those solvents will end up taking some of the paint off. And you get these horrible tide marks and stuff. So this is why I give a nice solid gloss coat to begin with. And again, the same as deciding where to put your secondary colours and your stripes and things. Again, go on and look at some reference pictures of where to put your decals. You don't have to come up with it yourself all the time. I quite like asymmetrical things when it comes to decals, so not matching the sides. So yeah, just find what you like and do them. Also, that gloss surface means that we can easily manipulate and move those decals around when they're in the decal solution. They're just sliding over the surface to where we want them. .433 I did here because I saw an old Forge World Eaters one. I had 433 on the turret, so that looked cool. And then I've put one of the larger Legion symbols. There's actually not as much real estate as I thought there would be on a tank this size to put the massive decals. So in the end, I didn't use many of them. But here I've got a decal over one of the doors, so I've applied it using the solution, decal solution micro set to begin with. And then once that had dried once, I then cut down the teeth to separate it. And then once that had evaporated off, I've taken the doors off, and now I'm just going to work on them individually. So this has had a microset and microsol on it already. And here I'm just going in and removing a bit of the excess where I don't want it. And I do this initially with a hobby knife for any sort of large areas like that. And then I'll go in and use a toothbrush as well. This is just to essentially to brush the bits off that aren't quite right. And I love doing this over hatches and doors like this because I know I'm going to do a ton of chipping around where the teeth are on that door. So this is kind of just like the first stage of doing that. Now, I'm not going to focus on physically chipping the decals in this video. I say that's something I think we can focus on a different project and make more of a focal point of that. This one we're going to focusing on. Next video we'll be talking about painting chips. Let's get one approach you can do. It's an approach I enjoy doing. But you can see there the kind of effect I was on about by physically damaging that decal up a little bit. We're already starting to show that damage. And then once I've done that, I just give it another coat of microsol just to help dissolve any of the film that might be left. Then once all that was dry, and I left that overnight, you don't need to, 4 hours they say on the bottle, often you'll get away with less, but I've left it overnight because it made sense to. There was no reason not to do that. Again, take your time with this project. It's why it's a multi-parter. I give a couple of gloss coats over the top of the decals, and I find that this just really helps to set them onto the model. Now I go in with an ultra matte. This is to take the shine off and just take off any of the shine of any of the film that hasn't dissolved. And now I'm going to give the model a finishing varnish. So this is just matte varnish. It's more satin, to be honest, but it says matte varnish on the bottle. And this is to unify the finish across the model before we move on to the next stages. This is by no means the final finish, but it's a nice finish that I enjoy working over the top of. It's not too matte, it's not too glossy. And it allows us to see all the shading that we've done, all that transition work that we've done. And it's also nice to paint over the top of. If you paint over the top of really glossy stuff, it can be quite awkward. But yeah, here is where I'd like to leave this week's video, if that's all right with you guys. It feels like a very natural stopping point for the project. Next week, I say the next video should be next week, will be focusing in on battle damage. So I've spent loads of time doing that. So those of you that are following on with the project, you need to try and get your tank up to this sort of stage in anticipation for the next video. We're going to end up finishing this sort of mid to late December, aren't we? I think so. If you need a deadline, it's going to be around then. But do jump in on the Discord if you've got it and use it, or in the comments here is really good too. And share social media, all the rest of it. This is about us having some fun together, learning and enjoying painting these bigger tanks, particularly if you've already got them in your collection and you haven't got around to doing them. But say, focused in on a couple of things on this video. I hope it was useful. Please do let me know what you would like more explanations of, or indeed what you enjoyed the explanations of, so that I can understand how to put together these series as we go on over the years. So yeah, if you've got any questions at all, guys, pop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you ever so much for all of your support, particularly with this project. It's been amazing. I was really nervous about doing it, but I'm really glad you guys are on board. But also the support you give us in everything else that we do. It means an awful lot to us. So take care. I'll see you next time.